Welcome to the first of, hopefully, many webinars from the Center for Safety, Equity, and Transportation. Dr. Panos Prevedouros, who is a recently retired professor of transportation from the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, is going to present to us today on naturalistic near-crash events from naturalistic driving data that was collected in pre-COVID Honolulu. Dr. Prevedouros is a registered professional engineer in the European Union, a court-qualified traffic and transportation engineering expert in Hawaii and Illinois, and an Envision sustainability professional. He has expertise in urban road network management, traffic safety, including incident management, traffic flow simulation, traffic signal optimization, intelligent transportation systems, demand forecasting, and alternatives analysis, and sustainable infrastructure, including transportation, energy policies, and regulations. So I hope that you all enjoy today's presentation from Panos.
Thank you, Vicky. It's a pleasure to be the first presenter in this series of CSET. Let me get started in the interest of time. So indeed, our presentation is near crash traffic events for using naturalistic driving data in collaboration with my master's student, Luana Carneiro Pereira. In my presentation today, I will cover the introduction and concepts of this type of safety analysis, the methodology, the basic statistics, some interesting correlations, a few models, and some of our conclusions of this ongoing project. This project was conducted under the auspices of the Center for Safety, Equity in Transportation. It's a partnership between among 4 universities, University of Alaska, Hawaii, Idaho, and Washington, with support from the federal US DOT. All studies of safety remain quite significant. This is the latest table I can find from, as you can see in the bottom, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, listing, among other things, the fatalities and injuries for a series of years, and the numbers are fairly staggering, with roughly 33,000 people being lost every year and close to 2 million people sustaining an injury. So again, any type of safety improvement, even if it has a 1% reduction, it is significant in terms of injuries and fatalities. So safety research is continuing. And it's been happening actually for many years, since the 50s, where essentially highway accidents became in the thousands. Since then, of course, there has been significant improvement, but lately the safety numbers have tapered off and they started increasing again. Now, there are 3 major categories of safety studies based on what we would call traffic accident data. Experts typically don't call these things accidents, they call them crashes. And each crash has a significant amount of data that has to do with the roads, the vehicles, and the people involved. This is the most common type of analysis that we've been doing for decades. It's based on essentially post-crash police reports. They're the most ubiquitous, but there are significant problems with them. One advantage of them, particularly going through historical records, is that there are literally millions of these reports. There is a huge national database of fatalities called FARS. Some of this data are actually subject to HIPAA Act restrictions, so you cannot drill too much detail into it because for the protection of the parties involved. And there is always the issue of unreported crashes. Minor events are not even reported. They don't call the police, and issues of this nature. More sophisticated issues have to do with, is there the data collection out in the field done by experts? Are police officers experts? So are the data of expert quality? A lot of questions there and a lot of variability. So we have millions of data points here, but the quality is not necessarily at top level. A second type of safety analysis is done by using test tracks and simulators where things are quite perfectly controlled. And these provide a lot of important lessons, particularly in the design of roads and in the design of vehicles, in the design of traffic signs and control equipment, because in this way you can actually test them and see which one works the best. However, when it comes to behaviors, they're far from perfect, because it's one thing to be driving a car on a computer and it's quite another of driving it in real traffic. The implications are completely different. And then comes the third category, which has become much more popular after the explosion of IT technology, intelligent technology. And of course, this has been happening for the last couple of decades, where the cost of computing and everything else has gone, and sensors has gone quite low. And these types of studies now have become more popular, and they create massive amounts of data. And the good thing about all these databases is that you actually have near perfect knowledge of what happened. Jumping to the first category is what the police officers in the field were able to gather after they're facing the mayhem of what has happened there. It's the vehicles may be toppled, they're dislocated, etc. Sometimes you don't even know which way the vehicle was coming. None of these questions are in this third category, because there is a continuous video that very clearly, for anybody who knows the location and what have you, can identify where the vehicle was going, the speed, and then pretty much what happened with a great amount of certainty. So the quality of the data here is very significant. Of course, by far, we're not the first to try this. In the early 2000s, there was the famous 100-car naturalistic study, which essentially monitored cars. But the difference in technology, now that I have been involved with what essentially these technologies, you can buy them off the shelf. These are not necessarily for individuals, but for companies to monitor their fleets and monitor their drivers. This 100-car naturalistic study in about 2002 was rather primitive, but still detailed enough, and we had a good basic understanding of what naturalistic driving studies are all about. And then with support with the state's DOTs and the Transportation Research Board, they launched the massive 2-year Sharp 2 naturalistic driving study, which involved thousands of drivers. And then similar studies have been done in Japan, China, Germany, and other places. So there is a lot of variety of such data, and so jumping to our project here, a small team at the University of Hawaii at Manoa partnered with Charlie's Taxis and Limousine, which is the oldest taxi company in Honolulu. The company, Charlie's Taxi, did an investigation of the available systems in the 2018-2019 timeframe, and they decided that the Samsara system was the one that they wanted to purchase and install. We were there to observe the situation, and actually we were granted essentially full access to the database, so that created an ability for us to have a significant number of data available. One good thing about this company is that it has a completely homogeneous fleet of vehicles. These are owner-operators, essentially operating 2 types of vans, the Honda Odyssey and the Toyota Sienna. So there is the homogeneity of the fleet is actually a positive, and most of these vehicles are only a few years old or nearly brand new. The data collection period started in October 2019. Actually, the deployments of the system started in the summer of 19. And it was supposed to be a quote unquote a forever system. But then, of course, the COVID pandemic kicked in, and we actually had a hard stop of the study in April 2020, where essentially the taxis ceased operating in Honolulu because there was no tourism and there was no mobility. There was a lockdown, as we all recall. Nevertheless, the months that we were active, and there were 2 quarters of the year, they were quite significant. We were planning to actually collect about 500 data points. We collected approximately, as I'll show you, 400 data points. So we collected naturalistic driving data for events that they caused in the system's acceleration a half a G or higher. So that's a measure we'll be talking about quite a few times, because setting the threshold also sets how much data you collect. So we developed a database for analysis. We derived basic statistics and investigated correlations, and then we looked at the more frequent type of accidents. The next step is methodology, but before I go there, let me take a very short break and share with you a few of the videos that they are quite interesting, so you have an idea of what I'm talking about, what kind of situations we did. Now, this is a video from an older system that this company had that actually became, this particular video became the impetus to really install things, these observation systems in the vehicles, because, well, as you will see, crazy things can happen. So this is the H1 freeway. We're riding with a Charlie's taxi vehicle, and just observe what happens here. And look at that. We have a complete, I mean, one of the most unlikely events that will ever happen to you on the freeway, right? Somebody driving on the fast lane in the wrong way. This is really one of those things that they take your breath away, isn't it? So having seen a few situations like this, you know, and for other reasons, quite a few companies have adopted systems for monitoring for their own liability and protection. Here is another situation now with a system active, the Samsara system active. As you see, the freeway is open. It's flying at 55, 60 miles an hour, but this is the lane going to the airport, and it's completely blocked. And here is also, you can hear the system once you have an event, it verbally informs the driver. Let's take another look at it. So you drive normally, you're on the lane to the airport. The freeway misleads you that it's free flowing, but the lane is completely blocked, as you see. So that's one of the common cases we have seen of near rear ends on the freeway. Obviously, in this case, and very fortuitously, nothing happened, which is also a very good thing. But this is also an example of what this study did. The near misses, that is the focus of it. Analyze what happened there, and clearly here you can see that there were a number of factors. Everything was essentially perfect, right? The weather is near perfect. There were no erratic maneuvers and all, but one lane of the freeway, the lane that the driver was taking, was completely blocked, and you had to go from 55 miles an hour to essentially 0. Let's see another example of that. These things on the freeway are more common. At least here you have a visual clue that a construction zone is coming up, and it has started already, and funny things happen in construction zones. So somebody, as you see there, if you pay attention, had a failed merge, and then again on the freeway, we went from 50, 60 miles an hour to essentially 0, while the other lane was still slowing down but flowing. So that's misleading cues to the driver. So essentially we had to decode all kinds of instances like this. And finally, the last one, again, it's a clear day. It has a green light, and boom, that was an actual crash. This is very rare to actually, when you do a study like this, to have actual crashes. So, and as you see, everything happens very quickly, but there are not a lot of questions left to what happened here, right? I mean, he was not really violating the speed limit. He was driving properly on the lane. Again, the weather was clear. No pedestrians were present. No complicating factors, just the other driver made a terrible mistake. So if we slow it down right there, the driver actually, if we slow it down sufficiently, it's a female who made a right turn into a one-lane road during red. So a clear case of what happened. So this is an example of, more substantial type of events, but essentially we analyzed over 1,000 of those, and we created a database of about 400, as I will continue with my presentation now to show you where we go with this. So how the system works is that it is installed in the car, and it has a camera that looks, as you noticed, in the front of the vehicle, but also the inside of the vehicle. And there is a user-specified acceleration level, the one that I mentioned to you, the 0.5 G. Once this is triggered, then automatically 5 seconds before the crash and 5 seconds after the crash are being saved and automatically downloaded to the cloud, that then the company that is in charge of that, in this case, Charlie's Taxi, and their coaches, driver coaches, can go look at the events, and then periodically they call in the drivers and they provide coaching based on the experiences they had in the field. So essentially, it is a teaching tool for the drivers for continuous improvement of the driver. And of course, inside the Samsara and similar systems, you have aggregate reports per driver or for your whole fleet, and how well is doing and how well is doing over time. So we're going to see a few of these in the presentation as we go along. Here is exactly now the layout that we at the UH received when we went to analyze each event. It's not only the video, there is a lot more data that comes with it through the database. First of all, you will see this was a situation of harsh braking. The G-force here, if you can follow my cursor, was 0.67 G. You have the video, which in this case was a 20-second video. You can also see the driver and what happens inside the vehicle. You can also listen to it if you was listening to music, talking to the phone, etc. Their route and the exact location of the incident, the speed profile. And in this case now, it is an interesting one of those, a lot of interesting mishaps that happen. This is a highway in Honolulu rated at about 35 miles an hour. Notice the barriers. There is not supposed to be any pedestrian crossing. And here, I don't know if you have noticed all this time, there is a pedestrian crossing the highway. And of course, in this case, again, it was just a near miss. Nothing happened. The speed here indicated is 7 miles an hour. It has a minor delay. The vehicle is essentially stopped already, and the pedestrian clearly made it through. So again, our task now is to observe all of this information. Some of this is automatically decoded for us in the database, but a lot of information, like exactly what happened, we have to code it with a number of variables, which is really our contribution in this study. So basically, everything is based on the harsh event, which is a user-adjustable G-force setting in the accelerometer of the system, which then begins to generate these videos and the rest of the data. Otherwise, you have, hours and hours and hours of taxis driving around, and then, it'll take you forever to get the true instance out of it. This is the big difference in technology from the 100 car and the Sharp surveys that I showed you before versus this one, year 2020 technology. In those big systems studies that I mentioned before, the recording was continuous. An incredible amount of essentially people hours was spent to actually eyeball all these videos, finally reach something that looks like a near miss or a risky situation, identify it and start coding it as an event. In our case, the system is so advanced that based at least on the accelerometer, you can print screen data and you don't have to follow 200 taxis driving around, and of course, everything is normal, right? 99%, 99.9% of the time, things are just normal. So the typical 0.5 G is the typical threshold used in the 100 car naturalistic study. And then you get before and after video, which, as you saw from the sample videos, is more than enough to figure out what was going on before this, the event, what happened at the event, and a few seconds after the event. And that's good enough. The rest of the information really does not pertain anymore to the event. The crash or the near miss has already occurred. So watching video many seconds after it and many seconds before it is meaningless. If you lower this setting, then you may get a lot of non-events. Again, you're going to spend a lot of people hours screening things that you are looking at the video. Sure, there is some deceleration or a lateral movement because the taxi changed or the vehicle changed the lane, but really nothing happened. So there is no case to develop. Throughout my presentation then and in the written report, we use terminology such as harsh event, which is what Samsara uses in the system, or plain event. It was a traffic event, or near crash or near miss. All these are alternative wordings of recorded events. And of course, in case of a crash, we just label it what it is, which is a crash. Talking about the methodology now, there was a lot of work involved because the system doesn't do these things automatically. So once you have an event, you have to look into environmental conditions, vehicle characteristics, road characteristics, driver characteristics, and event characteristics. Environmental conditions, for example, was the pavement wet or dry? Was it a rural or an urban area? Lighting conditions, weather. Driver characteristic, we identify drivers by their number, not by their name, for confidentiality, their gender, and whether they appear to be distracted or not. Event characteristics by the day of the week, location, speed profile, and many of these data were thankfully provided for us. But again, as traffic engineers, we have to provide more detail about vehicle movement. And also we rated the incidents on a 1 to 5 scale. Originally, we called this the wow scale. Did this video really wowed us with what happened? And 5 is a major wow, like for example, the near miss at the airport, or the wrong way going the motorist video we saw. 6 would be an actual crash. There is no wow anymore. The system failed and there was a crash. So 5 is one click below. It was so close, something happening, but it didn't. And then it goes downward from that with a perceived impact of 1 is very mild, near rear end incident that caused, an acceleration, a deceleration of 0.5 G or more. So again, by the time that the study was stopped because of the lockdown, we had finally collected many events, of which 402 there were eligible events. In other words, we can look at the video and say, okay, here we have a near miss, and we can code it because we believe that what we see, we can identify factors that cause this near miss. As opposed to, I told you several events that, you look at the video and yes, it was triggered by the accelerometer, but there is absolutely that we can see absolutely nothing to worry about or a safety risk. So the 402, 388 were near crashes or near misses, and 4 were actual crashes. So here I'm going to take you very quickly through a number of characteristics, such as Thursday was the day with the most recorded near misses. Most of the events were mild in the perceived factor. Only 6 events were scary, 4 were crashes, and 36 were, high risk events, a big perceived likely impact. The rest were moderate to low impact type of events. So in other words, most of this means that even if a collision has happened, it would have been extremely mild, maybe a little bump on the bumper, nothing severe. The auto braking system, again, we have only 2 types of vans. Some of them, about 1/3, they come with an auto braking system. It's called AEB, Automated Emergency Braking transfer in the car lingo when you buy accessories for your vehicles. Vehicles have AEB or not. Yeah, most of the cases, it was a straight alignment on the segment, and 69 cases it was on a curve. Parking was present again in a small number of cases. The type of the road, we characterize roads from narrow local streets all the way to freeway, and that's the distribution with, of course, most of the events happening on major arterials where you have a lot of interactions between vehicles that this makes sense. And when it comes to traffic control, two conditions predominate. One is the events happen near a traffic signal, or the events happen where there was no control. Of course, all the road segments have a speed limit and maybe parking regulations, but no other control that was of significance. When it comes to traffic conditions, Honolulu is at the time before the pandemic was busy with tourists, and all the conditions of the accidents were really medium and heavy congestion, the super majority, I should say. Light conditions were not very frequent. Lighting conditions, again, like in most other studies, most near misses and accidents do happen during sunlight and clear conditions. I guess drivers feel more comfortable in speeding or being more distracted if the weather becomes more inclement. Perhaps they pay more attention or they drive more conservatively. Honolulu, the island of Oahu, is not particularly rural, so only 21 of the instances would qualify as happening on a rural road. The rest were all on urban roads. Pavement surface was only 10% of the cases. Quite a few pedestrians, about a quarter of the cases were involving pedestrians. Very little rain was observed in our database. Again, most of the instances, nearly all of them happen under clear conditions. I will talk a little bit about the gender of the drivers, which of course in this case is very skewed because it represents only the drivers of the taxis, and it's a male-dominated industry. We have a few instances on a work zone, about a little less than 10% of them. And then visually, we rank the quality of the pavement, and most of the circumstances happened under pavement that it was visually good or very good. It didn't have any potholes, roughness, or bumps that we can see. Continue with basic statistics. Now there are 3 different categories of data. Non-vehicle events. This involve essentially pedestrians, bikers, and on occasion animal on the road. We're going to look into the bigger categories of them. Is pedestrian in mid-block crossing. So this is a legal crossing. So 29% of these cases involve the pedestrian in a legal crossing. Mid-block, 18% of the cases involve pedestrians in a crosswalk near an intersection. Only 14%, much lower than this, were involved in a pedestrian in mid-block location and illegal, like the picture I showed you earlier. Of course, 14% is not a small number, but the instance with near misses dominate, regular pedestrian behavior, not irregular behavior. Then we have a lot of data of events for the V1 vehicle. V1 is, we always refer to the taxi, the vehicle with the equipment from which we got all the data, the monitoring equipment. And as you can see here from the data, the first couple categories is 50% of the cases. V1 almost rear-ended V2. So the taxi, the van almost rear-ended V2. Of course, all of these are focused because, again, when the equipment is on the taxis, you see the mistakes of the taxis, not so much the mistakes of the others. We don't have equipment and we're not monitoring the general traffic around it. And the second most common mistake was V1 late response to red light. So the two of them are about 50%. And if you add the third one, the vehicle one was abrupt braking or stopping. The vehicle should have, the driver should have been more gentle in the stopping process. And that immediately takes you to almost 60% of the instance involving the vehicle one, which is the taxi. But in many cases, also the other vehicles were the instigators of the event, of the near miss. The first three items essentially form more than 50%. Very common as you drive, you complain about the other driver cut in front of you. So quite a few drivers actually do that. It's a fairly common occurrence at the rate of about 28%. The other vehicle made a change or weaved between lanes, 14%. And third category is the other vehicle exhibited erratic behavior. An example of that was that the vehicle was blinking, indicating to go right, and actually it went left. So that would be an example of erratic behavior, very unpredictable if you are a driver following them. You expect them to go right and they go left. Very surprising. When it comes to correlations now, we looked at differences between these two groups. These are completely different categories of roads, highways, and freeways on one side, and the rest of the roads in the other class. In traffic engineering, of course, we call this the uninterrupted group because they are free-flowing most of the time. Here, the city engineer actually controls the traffic with stop signs, with roundabouts, and with traffic signals. So this is interrupted traffic. Part of the time you give them the red and you stop them and you serve somebody else. Here you don't have control like that in this category. So a lot of comparisons to see, are there differences between the groups? And there are quite a lot of differences. I highlight a few here. We're going to go through this fairly quickly. There are more events at highways, freeways, construction closures than on city streets. So construction zones are, and we know that from experience in transportation engineering, that construction areas and closure of lanes are far more risky on the highway and the freeway rather than on city streets because of the speeds and the merging and the confusion that they may create. And of course, drivers should be more aware and slow down at those locations. There were more events on highways and freeways in spots with rough pavement. So rough pavement seem to be somewhat of a contributor on high-speed facilities, not so much on lower speed facilities such as city streets. There were more events on highways and freeways under heavy traffic. Again, the rear end risk is much higher on the freeway, again, because of speeds, than on an arterial street where part of the time you're expecting to be stopping because other people are maneuvering or you're gonna hit a red light. The number of events in general is higher at signalized intersections, and events with pedestrians are almost non-existent in highways and freeways. Clearly, you don't expect a pedestrian to cross a highway, but again, it's not out of the realm of possibility. And freeways generated more scary near misses, but urban roads had more actual crashes. We also found a correlation between the analysts' perceived impact. This is again the wow factor, where 5 is really took our breath away about the high risk of this incident, and 6 is an actual crash, versus the G-force recorded by the accelerometer. And there is a correlation of approximately 40%, which means there is something there, but it's not particularly strong. So the accelerometer's recorded G-force and the scariness of the events have some correlation, but the G-force is in general not a good representation of crash risk. Winding down our findings for this part is some models. There is a lot of technical factors involved here. We targeted this presentation as a little bit more for the general audience, so I have some excerpts of what this model appears to indicate. I'm sorry. Let's go back here. Well, as expected, what is this model doing? Events with pedestrians. What are some of the contributing factors? Well, as expected, the presence of pedestrian crossings concentrates the risk of events with pedestrians. So if you are looking for events with pedestrians, where they will be most of the time close to where pedestrians cross. 3 out of 4 types of city streets also have large effects on near misses with pedestrians, such as major arterial, narrow local street, and regular local streets. This is a different dependent variable now, freeway, highway, rear end events. So this model indicates that the higher the highway or the freeway, the higher the risk for near rear end events. This is usually because some lanes get blocked while others flow more freely. And we have an example of that with the airport lane that I show you in the video, but this is much more common in other situations where you have some lanes slow down or stop while the other lanes continue at a higher speed. In this case, in this type of model for mixed freeway and highway, the use of mobile devices by the CTL drivers does not appear to be significant. But then the picture changes if we take a more drill down into rear ends and freeways only. So now the number of observations is more limited, but the factor is positive and it is significant. So mobile usage is not a good thing to do, particularly at the speeds of a freeway, because a lane can get blocked and then the risk for a rear end is much higher. And the final model now is rear end events on city streets. A lot of parameters here have positive and negative influences. This call out box essentially shows you some of the more important contributors. When you have an arterial with free flowing conditions, this is generally reducing the near rear end events. But if the arterial has a lot of interruptions, the probability of rear end events, the opposite of it, increases. Roads without parking lower the risk of rear ends. This came in the model, but also by us watching videos, we observed that parking maneuvers can cause abrupt braking and increase the risk for rear end. Sunlight and clear weather conditions, you wouldn't expect it, but it does increase the risk for rear ends, and it's the same conclusion as they had in the 100-car naturalistic study. And the presence of pedestrians increases the risk for a rear end event because the front vehicle hits the brake to protect or avoid a situation with a pedestrian, and of course it gets rear-ended by the vehicles following it. It's an expected type of event, and if the speeds are modest, then again it will wind up being just like the majority of our observations, a near miss. It was scary, but nothing happened, which is actually the best outcome. So going to our conclusions here. We developed a database with 402 near crashes and crashes from naturalistic driving data and videos. This required a significant effort to prepare, careful screening, video interpretation, and coding of the variables. The G-force by itself is not a strong indication of a near crash, but it helps us eliminate non-events. About 31% of the events occurred on a road segment with no traffic control other than speed limit. About 16% occurred on a freeway, and signal traffic control was present in about 40% of the events. Signal traffic control, it means traffic lights, right? And pedestrians were present in 24% of the events. In the recorded events, 89% were male CTL drivers, and 11% were female drivers. However, females are only 9% of CTL. So in this case, they seem to be overrepresented in the amount of near miss events, although in the real world safety, typically females tend to be at least a little bit safer than males. Maybe the situation is not the same in the professional world with taxi drivers. The automatic emergency feature, the AEB, did not seem to have a significant effect, but it's not really possible to know if it helped our outcome. Because of the way the studies and the way the data are collected, we cannot know if the AEB kicked in or not. In some cases, it may have really helped keep a near miss, and nothing more severe. The most frequent type of event was, again, that the V1 vehicle, the taxi van almost rear-ended the V2, followed by events with pedestrians and events involving a lane change. Watching the videos, a clear observation was that drivers make errors that are easily identifiable on video. So you can tell really what happened and who did what. However, almost all of the errors were eventually mitigated by driver reaction, which is to their credit. Both the taxi driver and the other driver together, or one of them, did the right thing, and the risky situation remained just that, a risky situation and not a crash. We do know that driver distraction and inattentiveness is on the rise, particularly because people get absorbed into the various media on their mobile devices. And then this will lead to more crashes. Thankfully, technology, the other side of technology may come to help. The automated emergency braking and other advanced driver assistance systems, such as essentially guidance and piloting, keeping the vehicle in the lane, can help keep near misses, because it's very close. In many cases, we saw it, it's almost a fraction of a second for a near miss to become a crash. And finally, this implementation by this taxi company and a lot of others that you can see results, fleet management deployments and results, show that these systems, the naturalistic driving database system and coaching, help a lot. So these are some of the aggregate statistics for Charlie's Taxi. They were doing, it's always it's a well-managed and safe company, but they have their share of incidents, which tending to zero in the 2 quarters that actually the Samsara NDB system was operational. And the operations have resumed now, and they have actually an even more sophisticated, different system, and we're participating in that study. So we'll see if the near zero event situation continues, and that will be a great testimonial for these systems. So this study has been concluded, and a report has been published by CSET. This is a live link that you can download the report. If you'd like to have a copy of this presentation, feel free to email me at pdp@hawaii.edu. And before I close, a big thank you to Charlie's Taxi of Honolulu for allowing us full access to their database and participation in the company's driver safety improvement program, something that will continue today. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you, Panos, for your presentation. It was greatly appreciated. Since nobody has posted any questions in chat for us or otherwise indicated, I'm sure that if anyone views this recording and has some significant questions, they'd be welcome to use your email address at the end to contact as well. And on that note, I hope that we have many people join us for our next CSET webinar presentation, which will occur on December 8th at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And it will be Kevin Chang and Mike Lowry of the University of Idaho presenting on exploring rail trails in our communities. With that, I'd like to thank you all, and I'm going to stop the recording.